I had a pretty fun April. I thought y'all might like to hear about it. The first portion of my trip through the Pacific Northwest was predictably busy. I had one quick rehearsal with the new band on the day I landed. The rest of the time was spent gathering borrowed gear, coordinating rental vans, and getting to the shows. Most of the shows were booked to play with Silver Lake 66 through their agent, so I didn't have much to do but wrangle musicians and just show up. Playing on the West Coast never fails to recharge my battery. Over the next few weeks, I would need that energy and then some. The rest of the month neatly strung itself together through what seemed like a dream sequence. Months ago, for late April, I booked a final mixing session for this gospel album I'm working on at Dialback Sound, just south of Oxford, Mississippi. Plane tickets being pretty cheap at the time, I asked my friend Ezra Meredith if he'd want to fly out and tag along. Ezra is the owner and sound engineer at the Deer Lodge in Portland, Oregon, and plays in the band Supplemental Pills. I knew he'd get a kick out of being a fly on the wall at this iconic southern studio. So comparing schedules, we figured out we could turn the whole trip into a circular tour of the Deep South, from Asheville to Nashville, Memphis to Clarksdale, New Orleans, Mobile, Montgomery, Atlanta, and finally back to Asheville. And what the hell, let's take my Jeep too. The plan was to meet Ezra in Asheville on the one day off before the second leg of my ramble. On a whim, while I was still out west, I checked to see if I could maybe change my flight so he and I could fly together. Props to Delta Airlines. I got my flights changed free of charge, and the aisle seats I treasure to boot. A small miracle. Back in Appalachia, we spent the day off in Asheville basking in the calm serenity of my gear lodge before the blues storm we knew was coming. Ezra had never been through the Deep South, so I gave him a ZZ Top hat to try to help him blend in a little bit. Day 1, Nashville, Tennessee. On the way to Music City, we stopped at Loretta Lynn's Kitchen for breakfast in Hurricane Mills, Tennessee. We hit Nashville at about lunchtime and walked down Broadway, skeptical we'd find anything but throngs of other hungry tourists. Robert's Western World is always a safe bet for good music, but it's also one of the more popular old spots on the Strip. Lucky for us, we were able to walk right in and sit right down at the only available two-top in the crowded room. Within a few minutes, we had a couple of PBRs and grilled bologna sandwiches in front of us, as the band on stage played Golden Ring by George Jones and Tammy Wynette. That night, after an obligatory stop at the Ryman Auditorium and a thorough tour through the Country Music Hall of Fame, we hiked over to Bobby's Idle Hour. The dive has been known since 1948 as a songwriter haunt situated in Music Row at the heart of Nashville's country music industry. It's also been up and moved a few times. When I went years ago, it was several blocks from its current location. We were supposed to meet our friend Warren Pash there, the writer of Hall & Oates' hit Private Eyes. He stood us up, but in his stead was the sole person in the bar, proprietor Josh. He was wearing a Jerry Jeff Walker shirt with a matching tattoo, which we all agree was pretty badass. Josh takes our admiration as a cue to give us free beer, crank the sound system, and light up an indoor smoke. He played us all his favorite songs. Before he went outside to make a call, he told us if anyone came in that didn't like this music, we could throw them the hell out. And a few more free beers, hats, and koozies later, we stumbled back to our hotel, a little stunned at our Nashville welcome. Day 2, Memphis, Tennessee. On the way down to the studio, we stopped at the birthplace of rock and roll. If you're only going to do one thing in Memphis, go to the Stax Museum. It's a fitting tribute to the Southern soul I love so much. It's the greatest music in the world. The rebuilt old church there ought to leave you misty, if you got a heart. There's some pretty outstanding record stores and fried chicken in Memphis, but we didn't really have time to do much else but drive by Sun Studios before heading south to Mississippi. Day 3, Water Valley, Mississippi. Working on this stage of the recording was owner of the studio and bassist on the record, Bobby Matt Patton of the Drive-By Truckers, whiz kid engineer Starlin Browning, and me. When we last left the mixing console at Dialback Sound, I felt we still had a lot of heavy lifting to do. Diving back in this time, though, everything seemed to fall right into place. It didn't hurt that we'd had a few months to stew on what we had so far, get a little perspective on the whole thing. This is a curious place to stay and record. I've heard lots of stories about orbs and shadowy figures, and how no one should sleep in the drum room. The studio is a converted house. It's what used to be the parsonage of the still operational North Main Methodist Church of Water Valley, Mississippi. In the late 1800s, it was home to a Reverend Gibbs. Reverend Gibbs regularly preached against the child labor of the local twine mill, and this eventually led to his death. Will Wagner, who was the president of the mill, confronted the preacher outside of the church after a service one day and beat him to death with a walking cane for speaking out against the harsh practices. That morning before departing, I still had a few final edits to take care of. I was the first one up. We slept downstairs in the studio. While I was brushing my teeth, I heard footsteps directly above me moving with purpose. A few steps this way and stop. 3 more that way, stop. I assumed our engineer Starlin had gone upstairs and was moving things around, except the steps seemed way too heavy to be his. Starlin's not a big guy at all. Knowing the history of the home, of course, my mind went where minds go. When I see him, Starlin tells me he hasn't been upstairs at all yet. And besides, there's not a room above that part of the basement in the first place. After we left, with a little reflection, Bobby Matt said of our work, "This shit is exactly why Dialback Sound is here. Favorite mixes out of here I've heard in years." Hell of a statement, as this is also the former Fat Possum studio. I like to think we had a little help from the good Reverend Gibbs. Day 4, Clarksdale, Mississippi. This is where the weird turned pro. We chased the sunset into Clarksdale just in time to watch it sink into the Delta. The home of the blues is a strange little town. We booked ourselves into the Shack Up Inn, an erratic cluster of renovated shotgun shacks with corrugated tin roofs and Mississippi cypress walls grouped within acres of cotton fields. The eccentric juke joint chapel at the center of it all has played host to
Tom Waits, Pine Top Perkins, North Mississippi All-Stars, Cedric Burnside, Elvis Costello, Robert Plant, Patty Griffin, Big Jack Johnson, Charlie Musselwhite, John Mayall, and Ike Turner.
I mean, that's a lot of talent. I myself have played there a couple of times too, so there's that. We drove a couple of miles into town to visit the intersection of Highway 61 and 49, the crossroads. Back to the shack, it's completely dark now. We go exploring and find ourselves behind the Hobson Plantation Commissary adjacent to the inn. I notice the big old building has what looks like an abandoned watchtower on top. Decrepit, no lights, busted out windows, totally creepy. A few steps away, there's a rusty old sign from another time propped up in the weeds advertising, "Abe's at the legendary crossroads." 3 suspicious-looking black cats cross in front of us. We walk a few more steps and I turn to see the watchtower is now fully illuminated. We are standing at the crossroads. Black cats just crossed our trail and we're being haunted. Pretty bluesy. At that moment, the street light we're standing under burns out. We're in full blues freak-out mode now. And for the rest of the night, we sit on our screened-in front porch sipping Maker's Mark, incredulously recalling what just went down, and hoping to get enough sleep for tomorrow's long drive to New Orleans. Day 5, New Orleans, Louisiana. We did not get enough sleep. After a sobering pass by the infamous Parchman Farm State Penitentiary, we drove through Indianola, Mississippi. This is the birthplace of B.B. King. And thanks to Our Lady of Synchronized Road Music, his version of Got My Mojo Workin' comes on my random playlist as we pass through this tiny little town. A little farther south, we made a pit stop in Bentonia, home of Skip James and Jimmy Duck Holmes. There we paid homage to the Blue Front Cafe, the oldest running juke joint in Mississippi. We crossed the Louisiana border. Our patron saint obligingly played my favorite Cajun song, Mes Petits Genois by Dewey Balfa. Driving down the endless Atchafalaya Basin Bridge on I-10, I thought to myself, this landscape looks like a Jerry Reed song. And like clockwork, Alabama Wild Man comes on.
It is exactly 5 o'clock, and you are listening to WWNC 90.7 FM. Music from Mr. John Coltrane. This is a 1958 Prestige sampler.
New Orleans. We were welcomed to the city that care forgot by a brilliant sunset over the bayou. For a place that has so much nightlife, it was probably a good thing that we got to the Prince Conti a little late. It's the kind of hotel where you drive into the lobby area and a valet takes it from there. We went to the Saturn Bar in time to see an honest-to-God New Orleans piano player, B.C. Coogan, slaying the house by himself. For his last song, he played Huey Piano Smith's Don't You Just Know It, and nearly everyone in the bar grabbed a partner and started dancing. It felt like something magic was happening. Day 6, Mobile, Alabama. At this point, I'm a little frazzled. The relatively short drive to the Azalea City, childhood home of me, was spent trying not to fall asleep at the wheel. Ain't gonna lie. We got to my mom's house, freshened up, and fixed a busted taillight with my Uncle Hap. And then, like the troopers we are, we went out on a tour of my grandfather's favorite local haunts. First was Mancy's Antique Club in Daphne, Alabama. In the women's restroom here stands a wooden cutout of a naked, mustachioed man wearing only a fig leaf. If you lift the fig leaf, a buzzer is set off that lets all the patrons know your curiosity got the best of you. This was my grandfather's kind of humor. Next up was the Bluegill. The Bluegill has been a dive bar seafood restaurant since 1958. We ate fried crab claws on Mobile Bay and watched for alligators. And finally, we ended up at Callahan's Irish Social Club. Most of my family lives within a few blocks of this landmark neighborhood bar and grill. Among the old pictures on their walls are a few of my grandfather. In one photo, he's playing clarinet with his friends on the sidewalk during a St. Patrick's Day celebration. Day 7, Asheville, North Carolina. Now, at this point, Ezra and I are trading driving duties about every hour just to stay alert. We stopped in Montgomery to pay our respect, and then kept trudging along. That's a boring-ass drive. A Mobile to Asheville drive means the infamous Atlanta traffic is all but unavoidable. And boy howdy, Hotlanta did not disappoint. It was slow bumper-to-bumper traffic for hours, nearly all the way to North Carolina. About dusk, my little Jeep finally made it up into the Blue Ridge Mountains. On our last day back in Asheville, we grabbed a six-pack to take over to my neighbor's house who'd been mowing the grass at his church all day. The Free Holiness Church of West Asheville is owned by J.D. Pincus, bassist for the Melvins and Butthole Surfers. He showed us around the grounds, played us tracks from his unreleased album, and told some pretty wild stories. My scrambled brain struggled to take it all in. I'm still not sure that last day, or any of this, ever happened at all. After that long drive back from Atlanta, less than, 20 minutes from my house, we got one last perfectly random song.
Bing, bing, bang.